Everyone, this is Chris Grosso with the Healing Journey web series presented by Toivo by Advocacy Unlimited. And my guest today is Mona Haydar. Mona, hi.
Hey Chris, what's up?
How are you?
Well, thanks.
Excellent. So, before we jump into this, I want to read your bio for our audience. It's quite impressive, and I've been very much looking forward to speaking with you. So, I'm super jazzed about today, but
Ditto that, ditto
I'm,
that.
I'm going to contain myself as I read the bio, and then we'll just get all excited in the interview. So, Mona Haydar is a poet, activist, practitioner of permaculture, meditator, composting devotee, mountain girl, solar power lover, and a tireless God enthusiast. She practices a life of sacred activism, poetry, contemplation, and advocacy for living gently upon the earth. She teaches classes and retreats on mindfulness and Islamic spirituality, leads workshops on creative writing, and performs her poetry. Her words have found homes in the hearts of seekers, wanderers, poets, artists, lovers, and stewards of the earth. She grew up in Flint, Michigan, graduated from the University of Michigan, and has since lived in Damascus, where she studied Arabic and Islamic spirituality, then went on to live in the mountains of northern New Mexico at Lama Foundation and in the redwood forest of Northern California with her husband and son. Mona and her husband, Sebastian, set up a stand in Cambridge, Massachusetts with signs that read, "Talk to a Muslim," "Free coffee and donuts," "Free conversation," and "Ask a Muslim," encouraging open and loving dialogue which garnered the attention of NPR, Al Jazeera, the Boston Globe, among other media outlets. Currently, she is working on her second collection of poems and her first work of nonfiction on Islamic spirituality through the lens of other spiritual traditions. She's working towards her master's in divinity, and Mona helps to grow a more universal love with her activism, writing, performing, and teaching. And she has a really wonderful website that you can visit her at and learn more, which is monahaydar.com, and we'll have those links for the audience on the page. So Mona, again, welcome. Thank you for joining me today.
Thanks so much, Chris.
Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot I really am excited to talk to you about today. I figure first, though, let's start with you and a bit about your story. I would love to learn a bit about your childhood, your relationship to spirituality, when that kind of began to flourish for you,
Sure.
your coming into awareness of God. Anything that you would love to share would be great.
Sure. So I was kind of a wild child growing up. I just spent almost all my time outside climbing trees, and I feel like the majority of my childhood was spent in this apple tree in my parents' backyard. And for me, I think I've really found God in nature. And that was my introduction to the essence of the Creator. And that's where I connect the deepest, even now. But so that's where I started out in that apple tree. And just that sense that there's something greater than myself, and that there, you know, nothing else in my life has brought me such solace or contentment than, you know, reaching back into those memories and those feelings. And beyond that, that just sense of just depth and interconnectedness and stillness. And so, yeah, and then I got really into poetry. I've been writing since, gosh, I mean, my first poem, I am dude, I am mood, I am Mona, you know?
Nice.
Yeah, yeah. I was in kindergarten, and it just kind of took off from there, and I've been writing ever since. And that's also one of the ways that I really connect to God and spirit, and it's one of the ways that I ground myself too. I can kind of get lost um, in the world of form and in the world of busyness and
Yeah.
the God of busyness, and the God of business too, and just kind of getting lost in that world, and writing really helps to bring me back down into the just into the earth of my spirit, myself,
Mm.
and my heart centeredness. So yeah, so between nature and writing and reading to others writing, I think, yeah, a huge part of my spirituality is, uh, you know I give thanks for those things. I'm in gratitude for those things because they are what helped me to get connected. So yeah, I grew up with seven siblings. I was number seven of eight. So just huge Arab Syrian family. But because they were all older, I feel like I had to grow up a little bit faster. I was always playing catch up, and so I think maybe I was a little bit more serious of a kid
Yeah.
than my friends were because I was really interested in what my siblings were doing, and they were in university and they were talking about these like lofty ideas, sometimes they'd be taking like philosophy classes and I'd be like, what does that mean? And, my brothers, go look it up, things like that. And so, I feel like I grew up kind of fast. And so what that means now is that I kind of hunger for like fun
Mm-hmm.
and I hunger for that like childlike playfulness, and I get it a lot in my life. So I feel like I'm really playful as a result of growing up kind of fast, which is
Mm-hmm.
counterintuitive, but
Yeah.
I don't know, somehow it works for me. So between my family and my writing and my spirit and finding God in nature, those are the really three things. Yeah,
I love that. And we're friends on the mighty Facebook, and
yeah.
your posts are always like happy and playful for the most part, and I love that.
Except when they're not.
Except when they're not. Yes, of course. But for
Yeah.
the most part, they are, and that resonates because something that has been important to me in my life is staying in touch with that youthful spirit. And I often joke that an 11-year-old, and I don't ever want to
Totally.
not be that. Like to
Totally.
have that playfulness. And so I also want to say I really appreciate how you're talking about finding God and experiencing God in nature. That's something I think that I've encountered a lot of people, and actually, maybe 15 minutes prior to us connecting today, um, I saw a comment from a post I made, not to make this all about social media, but I shared a quick 2-minute video from Ram Dass, and really just very lovely, quick little talk, excerpt from a talk he gave. And he's talking about how the journey to enlightenment is full of errors, and that is the journey, so don't be so hard on yourself. That's not verbatim, but someone posted a comment, a very lengthy comment. To be honest, I didn't read the whole thing, but the gist of it was that, it's all an illusion, don't waste your time, blah, blah, blah. And he's not the first person I've heard say something like that. A lot of people can tend to get caught up in the transcendental, like mystic experiences, which
Yeah.
are very important and valuable.
Yeah.
And I've actually had some lengthy talks with, I think, a mutual friend of ours, Adam Bucko.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I know we've had some really great talks around this too. How people can really get lost in that end of things, and therein takes them out of the God in nature, or just
Mm.
nature in general, or becoming, like it says in your bio, a sacred activist, and finding God in the world. So I really appreciate that you brought that up, and I just thought that was a nice little cue for me to be able to throw that in there. Very timely with that comment. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah, and panentheism, the teaching of God and everything in God, that's a
Yeah.
very dear one to me as well, or
Ditto.
guru, what Maharaji Ram Dass would say is, seeing the guru in all, and all in the guru. So,
Yeah. I
finding the
think,
balance. Yeah.
yeah, I think when we lose sight of that, I say this all the time to friends and beloveds, but like separation from that is the only sin.
Mm.
Like that nothing is devoid of God.
Right. Right.
you know, uh, Even if you just want to look at it in terms of God being the creator of all or the imaginer of all, anytime you say that this is devoid of God, that's a separation and that's breaking the magic.
Mm.
It's breaking that sacredness to it, and that's the reality of the situation. This whole world, this whole universe, this whole the seen and the unseen, all of it. We're in this like cosmic play, and just playing out our roles and our parts, and to say that, oh God, it's just such a tragedy when somebody says that that's not part of God, or that's not, it's just like it hurts, on such a
Yeah.
deep level.
Yes, I exactly. That's why I named my second book Everything Mind. It's
Mm,
all part of it. It's finding the formless in form while also
totally.
recognizing the form is formless. From the Buddhist Heart Sutra. It's
Yeah,
I don't know. It's been very important to me at least. So
yeah.
and we're gonna. I know God can also be a very loaded word for some people. So we're
Totally.
we're gonna jump into that in a little bit. But before I figured let's talk. Let's start a little bit about talking about Islam.
Sure.
Um, I will not pretend like I am an expert on Islam, which is part of why I'm very excited to talk to you. I too am in school for my Master's of Divinity and have been
Oh,
learning more and am very fascinated and feel a bit guilty that I haven't, made myself more well versed, so to speak, in that it's a beautiful tradition. And Islam itself, as I've learned, it has two different meanings, if I'm correct. One, it primarily means peace, but also surrender. And if you put them together, it's the peace that comes when one's life is surrendered to God. Now, I don't know if that's a very like schooly kind of thing, but I thought that in
oh
and of
yeah.
itself was a really beautiful introduction to Islam. So, is that accurate? Is that off the mark? What?
Yeah, I mean, that's like the very Sunday school definition. And then,
Yay!
I do these retreats with kids. I mean, you got it. You're spot on. I do these
11-year-old.
I love it. Yeah, so I do these retreats with kids, and a lot of the time they say, Islam is peace. Islam means peace.
Yes.
And with Muslims having the kind of reputation that we have right now in the media. I hate to use that word like that, but yeah, okay,
Right.
on the news and things like that.
Sure.
Um, you know, it's a nice catchphrase. It's a nice like soundbite. Islam means peace. Well, let's talk about what that means actually, because yes, while Islam comes from the root word for peace, which is salam, which is how we greet each other every time we see one another, peace be upon you.
Mm.
It also stems from the root word for safety. And that is the root word for salam, for peace.
Mm.
Because when you're in peace, you're in safety. And when you surrender, you're also in safety. One of my dear teachers, Habib Ali, he says that when I believe it's actually a hadith or a quote from the Prophet Muhammad himself, peace be upon him, and he said that when a human being surrenders herself or himself to the earth and to the universe and to God, that then the universe will then surrender themselves and lay itself out for that human, for that person. But when that human, is working towards something and is not is doing, when that human being is doing and toiling, and has not submitted him or herself, that then the universe will go out of its way to trip that person up
Mm.
and to create roadblocks. And that as long as you are surrendered, the universe will be in service to you. And so, I just find that huge for my theology.
Yes.
To say that Islam is about surrender, but it's also about being at peace.
Yeah.
It is, the way of Jesus in that it's the way of love, because love is the way of surrender.
Yeah.
There's an Arabic saying that says, to the one whom you love, you have surrendered. Because when you're in love, your beloved can wish you anything and can say or do anything. And especially in those like very pure and innocent early love, the early love stages, that person can do no wrong in your eyes and in your heart, and they can say nothing that will stir your heart or move your heart away from them. And so one of the very like prominent Muslim prayers is to say, "O changer of hearts, O turner of hearts, make me steadfast, make my heart steadfast upon this path. because, our hearts turn and turn and turn. And so let us turn towards the one and be steadfast in that, because we often take these long detours because we haven't submitted, we haven't surrendered. And the universe wants to catch us and wants to say, hey, like, give up, give in, and so when we do, it's a straight shot.
Yes. But the trick is doing it. And
How do you do it?
that's why I was kind
Yeah.
of laughing to
Yeah.
myself when you said that at first, because I'm thinking of my own life and my God, yeah, the universe has had to step in quite a few times and trip me
Ditto.
up. So, yeah, right. I'm sure it's something we all share in common.
Yeah,
So
and that's the human's journey, right?
it is, right. Going back to the Ram Dass video I just said, that it's all part of making mistakes and learning and growing. And yeah, well, so thank you for the clarification, and I'll just throw myself under the bus and say, for the next however long we have here, 45 minutes or so, I will I look at myself as a student, because I don't know. So I appreciate you being gentle with my slight ignorance towards
Oh
these
no,
things.
not at all. I'm super just like impressed by you and everything that you know, and I'm like fangirl over here, just in awe of all that is Chris.
Oh, great. Oh boy. I'm so bad at taking compliments. Sorry. No, I'm like, my whole groove
It's
is
just a
off.
conversation. You're not
Right.
the student.
Right.
I'm not the student. We're just
Well,
hanging out. Because
thank
that
you.
makes me nervous.
Uh, okay. Well, thank you for saying that. I do appreciate it. You're right. Mutual
Sure.
conversation. Bring it back. Bring it back. Okay. So let's talk then about God, um, which, again, may be my very nursery school understanding with Islam. It is the one God. That's how it's referred to, if I am correct, the one God.
Okay.
Um, so, what is this one God, and how does it differ possibly from other gods?
I would say that the one God does not differ in any way from any other God or gods, but that it is, or God is the the overarching oneness, the total interbeing and interconnectedness that is everything, and it's totally abstract. And because um, that God and that Creator created time and space, and because our minds are bound by that time and space, how can we understand that which is beyond time and
Sure.
space?
Right.
And so, talking about what God is and what God isn't, well, in Muslim theology, it's quite simple because God gave Himself, and we say Him because that's how God referred to Himself in the Quran, but it doesn't necessarily connotate that God is male.
Sure.
Islam came to a patriarchal society, and so to call, and also a pagan society, and so to say that, to refer to God in the feminine, um, for whatever reason, just doesn't happen in Islam. But what does happen is God often refers to Himself as we, and for me that all ties back to that interbeing, that interconnectedness,
Mm.
and rather than a royal we, we learn about it as the royal we, because that's how the monarchs refer to themselves in their decrees or whatever. But I like to see it as it's the web that ties us all together, and that we essentially are the we. And so God discusses Himself in the Quran as the beginning and the end.
Mm.
So how can you be both the beginning and the end? He discusses Himself as the seen and the unseen. Well, how can you be both at the same time?
Mm.
Well, if you're beyond time and space, you can do whatever you want.
Right. Sure.
you know,
Right.
He is the most merciful, and He is the punisher. And He is the creator of all things and the destroyer. The giver of life and the taker. And so, all polarities and extremes, there is God. And so all we can do with our minds is to say, then what about everything in between? Is God there too? And I would say yes.
Mm.
If God wanted us to believe that He was the beginning and the end, well, then isn't He the perfect now?
Mm.
you know,
Right.
then yes, of course. And where is God but for this now exactly, in that that is all we know and can experience.
Mm. What I love is I'm hearing so many similar elements to different wisdom traditions as you're speaking. The creator and the destroyer. Kali comes to mind,
Yeah,
and also as you're talking about the interconnectedness of all things, I'm thinking about Thich Nhat Hanh and the Buddhist lineage,
yeah,
and I really appreciated that because I know obviously a lot of Buddhist people have issue with the word God. A lot don't as well, but there's not a God per se in that tradition.
yeah,
But I think that's a beautiful way of showing some relation, some similar ground that Islam can share with Buddhists. I think it's pretty obvious that there is common ground amongst Jews and Christians because there's God and even
yeah,
the tradition of Hinduism. I know there are plenty of differences as well, but something that's very important to me is where can we find some similarities, or where can we
yeah,
find some ground to talk from, to build from, to come together on. And it doesn't mean we have to see everything eye to eye, and that's okay. But where can we share and learn from one another and celebrate together? And so I think that was a really beautiful way of sharing that. Um,
well, I lived at Lama Foundation.
yes,
So,
of course. So
so, being at Lama, Ram Dass wrote "Be Here Now" there,
yes,
and if that the spirit of that place is anything, it is interspiritual.
yeah,
It is the weaving of the cosmic tapestry of all traditions and all
right,
spiritualities. Um, and so I think I learned to use the words that were less dogmatic,
yeah,
and less. Well, I grew up in this Judeo-Christian society, and the common language didn't necessarily like fit with my brain, with my heart language, and I loved the new things I was learning, like
right,
interbeing from Thich Nhat Hanh,
right,
and a lot of the Buddhist teachings just resonated so deeply within me as a Muslim,
yes, yes,
and I didn't see them. People often say, like, well, isn't your Islam like lessened or threatened by your acceptance of other explanations of things like karma and reincarnation and things like that? And, hogwash. Like, no,
right, right,
that's a bunch of bull. It's just one of these things that we just can tie back into with the use of language.
right,
It's so funny that it can separate us, but in that same way, it can bring us together by
right,
using the same language. Like I can use the language of the Buddhists and the descriptions of the Hindus, and still remain solidly and devotedly Muslim,
right.
because I believe in the God of everything.
Yes, yes,
In the God of the Hindus, and in the God of Kali, and in the God of Hanuman and the Buddha, and everything in between.
yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I'm sure you hear all of that in there for sure.
Oh yeah, and that's yes, and I love like my heart kind of is like doing a little dance as you're talking because that's exactly how I feel too,
Yeah,
and I love like when I've read Meister Eckhart's descriptions of the Godhead,
yeah,
and it sounds just like the explanation of Dharmakaya I've read, in
yeah,
Buddhism or of
yeah,
Brahman from Hinduism. Um,
totally.
that that I don't know, that just makes me I feel corny saying happy, but it does make me feel
Why
happy and
not?
connected and
No,
because that doesn't
totally.
even do justice, but it really like it warms my heart in a way to like you said have your own faith yet learn and grow really from these other faiths. They
Yeah,
to me I think they in my experience I still struggle with saying I am this or that. I think I
yeah,
resonate most closely with the teachings of Buddhism. However, I have a deep love for God, quote, God, and that's very important to me. And Maharaji has been very important in my life and in the teachings from Ram Dass. So, you know, finding that place where not even reconciling, but where they do fit together, and it's okay when they don't, and still learning and growing, and it's a beautiful conversation and dance we can have with one another.
Yeah, and I think in those funny places where they don't fit, I actually don't think that that's real. I
Hmm.
think that that's ego.
Man-made.
I
Yes.
think that
Yeah.
those things are man made. We don't want it to fit because it messes with our historical understandings and our historical explanations of things. Um, and I think that that all stems from a sense of human like desire for grandeur,
Mm.
like mine is better or exclusivity.
Sure.
Mine is different and therefore better.
Yeah.
Um, and I just don't feel that way. I
Yeah.
think we're all the same. We're all on the same shit. We're all doing the same stuff.
Yeah.
Like at the end of the day, we're all made of the same earth stuff, and we will
Yes.
all return to the same earth. And in between, like, were we kind to one another? I don't care what religion you practice or what ideology you live under, even if you're an atheist, if you're kind to humans and animals and creatures of all sorts and the earth, um, hey, I think that's what religion is. you know?
I I do know exactly what you're saying. I have
So
okay.
call it God or not,
Yeah.
I think ego is the only thing that gets in the way, is our funny little twisted sense of self that wants to be special and different
Yeah.
and better than, um, yeah.
So I have this friend. First of all, yes, absolutely. I love what you said. It just made me think of it when you mentioned atheism, and I know I've talked about him on the show before. But he's the humanist chaplain at Yale, and he's an atheist, and he wrote a great book called Faithiest. His name is Chris Stedman,
Mm,
and he is one of the most like just spiritual, good-hearted dudes I have ever met. He wouldn't call himself that, but his whole thing is about working with people from varying religions.
mm,
Like I said earlier, finding where they can come where they can come together, meet, and be of service to humanity, to the
yeah,
betterment of us as a species.
yeah,
And that's tremendous. That's such a beautiful thing. And what he explained to me, and as he writes in his book Faithiest, is that Faithiest is actually a derogatory term
mm,
that atheists use for other atheists who, don't believe in God but are willing to talk with religious people and work with them. And how crazy is that?
mm,
But anyways, more ego, more dogma, more whatever. But
yeah,
it's beautiful that there are faitheists out in the world, that are just looking to help and be of service. I
yeah,
mean, does it get more spiritual than that? Showing up
yeah,
selflessly to help one another.
yeah.
Yeah. So going back to Islam and the Muslim faith, I wanted to ask about Muhammad because that's obviously very important. Um, and again, not knowing very much, but I know that he was, if I'm correct, considered God's mouthpiece, so to speak, for the faith. That's how I've come to understand it. Again, could be very wrong, but what I teacher teach. No, I'm just kidding. But I know that that's an integral part, obviously, of this. So I would love to talk a bit about Muhammad, and I know that it was not an easy go for him in the
Yeah,
beginning, which made me think of Christ and the struggles he had, and I'm
yeah.
sure many other great saints and yogis and sages. So, could you please talk a bit about Muhammad and for this nursery school student?
Oh no, I mean, oh my God, just the invitation to speak about my beloved and the beloved of God, it warms my heart. And um, sure, he was the mouthpiece of God, but through Gabriel, through the angel Gabriel. And, Muslims believe in the seen and the unseen. And so we believe in all the prophets who manifested in this world
Right.
as humans, and were sent the same message. So Muhammad is um, among his brothers in a long line of prophets, And, I could rattle off the list to you, but I think it's really important to say that the Quran specifies that though it mentions specific examples of who these prophets were, there are countless and innumerable uh, examples of the ones who were not mentioned.
Sure.
And so, you know, I believe Krishna was a prophet of God.
Right.
And I believe that the Buddha was. And I believe that there are countless other ones who came and relayed the same message that the Prophet Muhammad did. And the message was that we are one, that this whole universe with the beautiful earth we were amazingly given, and that, we honor and love, is only here as a Quran for us, as a spiritual guidebook for us. Like, you go into nature and you see biodiversity, that everything exists in the light of another, and that, they feed one another, the different, creatures and plants and, the mycelium and all of that it all feeds each other and it works together and it produces this magnificent, glorious thing. And the Prophet Muhammad came to say that we are just one part of that, and that actually humans are ambassadors on this earth, are caretakers of the earth, and that is our vital role. Yes, our vital role is to know God, but it is specifically to know God through care of earth. And one of the things that makes me both happy and sad is to see Muslims on the forefront of the global warming and climate change activism and movement. I just love seeing Muslims who are active, because to me that is an integral part of our faith, our tradition. And it makes me sad to see so-called Muslim countries deplete the earth of its natural resources like oil, and call themselves Muslim. Because to me that's totally counter to what we believe. And so a huge part of what the Prophet Muhammad brought was this message that we're not separate from each other, and that we're not separate from nature, and that we have to work together to perpetuate the beauty in the world, and the unity in the world. And that only when we see ourselves as separate can we lay so much destruction upon the earth.
Beautiful. Yeah, and that goes right back to what we've been saying. So many of the wisdom traditions say that same exact thing, just in their own language,
Yeah.
and that's really
Yeah.
beautiful.
And one of the things, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, God says about him in the Quran, we did not send you except as a mercy or as unconditional love to the world, to the worlds, to the universe. And this message of unconditional love, which is wrapped in mercy, that's just not a message that I think is getting out there enough.
Sure.
That actually Muhammad was just about love, and anything else is secondary. So people want to talk a lot about jihad,
Yeah.
and they want to talk a lot about Sharia. Well, I'll tell you right now what Sharia is. Sharia is all of the things I just said. Sharia is the laid out path and trajectory to attain gnosis of God, to attain direct relationship with the Creator. And how do we do that? By being stewards of the earth. That is the way, by wrapping ourselves in the cloak and in the blanket of that unconditional love and mercy, and saying that we're not separate from nature or from one another, and how could we then harm one another? That's actually the integral message. And so it is to see God in the other. Because if you see God in the other, you could never harm the other.
Right.
And actually you see that there is no other. You know, that it's just you and you and you and you and more and more and more, and it's all love. So yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying all of that, and I don't want to dwell on the negative, but
Yeah.
you mentioned jihad, and it's obviously it's in everyone's face. I mean, I feel like I'm in
Yeah.
Ottawa. I'm from the U.S. And I travel back and forth quite often. We just not too long ago brought in the first few flights of Syrian refugees.
Yeah.
I was so proud of our new prime minister for
Yeah.
this heart stance he has taken on this. Yet what surprised me, and I'm relatively new to Canada. I've only been here a couple of years, but I can honestly say it is a softer way overall up here than the U.S. But I was quite taken back by the backlash that he has and continues to receive about bringing these people here, these Muslim people,
Yeah.
and the ignorance that is surrounding all of that is, I'm sure, tenfold in the U.S.
Yeah.
And that's part of why I really wanted to have this conversation with you as well, because it no other word is coming to mind than that of ignorance, and I'm guilty of that too. As I've said, I'm not ignorant in the sense of I'm worried by any of this at all, but I'm just learning more about this Muslim tradition, which again I think is very beautiful. So, what what has been your experience with this? I know you've said in a few posts, especially right around the time of the Paris attacks, um, you felt like you were getting some looks more than usual,
Yeah.
and how has that lessened since a bit of time has gone by? How have you been feeling? Because I think at one point you even said you kind of had a fear for your own safety.
Absolutely. And that hasn't gone away, you
Yeah.
know. Um, I'm an obvious Muslim,
Right.
and as an obvious Muslim, for those with hatred in their hearts, I'm an obvious target.
Right.
And I've experienced enough to know that that is real in the world, and that to uh, people who are hurting, I do pose some kind of threat to them. And I just find that so heartbreaking because anybody who sits down with me and gets to know me, like I operate in the world that every person I meet is a potential friend.
I
Like
love that.
I don't operate in the world that everyone I meet is just a stranger or an acquaintance.
Right.
I just I that's just how I am. And so it breaks my heart to think that people, don't see me that way because of a way I choose to dress, um, as a spiritual act, as a spiritual practice.
Mm.
Um, and anybody who asks me about it, like, we did the Ask a Muslim thing,
Yeah.
like, I'm happy to talk to anyone about anything. Um, because I believe that that's the way towards connectedness. And man, you mentioned everything that Canada is doing for the Syrian refugees. And I just, oh my God, just a huge sense of gratitude overwhelms me
Mm.
every time I see those videos. And the first flight that arrived and the Prime Minister was there,
Yeah.
I mean, I was weeping
Yeah.
just to see a world leader um, open his arms
Yes.
to the needy and the poor and those who have nothing. Yesterday I posted a video on my Facebook of what Homs looks like. And I've been to Homs, and it was just this gorgeous, bustling, ancient city.
Mm.
And it's rubble.
Right.
It's nothing but rubble now. And it's just so heartbreaking because when we understand that these things, like Eckhart Tolle talks about pain bodies,
Right.
and that's the reason for any of this happening in the world. Well, I want to talk about that. I
Yeah.
want to discuss that. Like, what is war? But our pain bodies playing out,
Yeah.
their stuff on another person or on a beloved or a potential friend,
Yes.
and I love to sit, I would love, and I made a video yesterday saying like, hey, Donald Trump, I would love to sit down with you over a donut and some coffee and talk, because I don't think you you would say some of the things that you say if you knew a Muslim, or if a Muslim was a friend, you
Well,
know.
supposedly he has plenty of Muslim friends that, agree with what he's doing. I've heard him say that plenty of times, and every time it's like, yeah, right. Like, come on, man.
Yeah, I mean, I think somebody with that large of a pain body doesn't necessarily have a lot of friends. And that's what he
Right.
needs, actually.
No, you're right.
And I would be totally willing to be anyone's friend,
Yeah.
to be his friend even, and I think that the painful part is he doesn't want to be my friend.
Yes, yes.
you know,
Yeah.
and people with especially large pain bodies, they don't want to be your friend or my
Right.
friend.
Right.
And I think, talking about these things as in non-abstract ways, in tactile ways, like, what is Islam? Well, Islam is about Sharia. Well, what is Sharia? Well, Sharia is the way that you experience and get to know God. Well, how do you do that? Well, you take care of the earth. Well, how do you do that? Well, don't produce a lot of waste. Well, how do you do that? Like, so
Yeah.
it just comes back and back and back, and you have to keep asking those questions.
Right.
And I think to have that curiosity is the key, to talking about jihad, to talking about extremism or ISIS, or any of these large and complex, and or the Syrian war. To talk about any of these things, you have to have real curiosity, and to say like, what's actually going on here,
Yeah.
and not just what are the geopolitical facts,
Right.
you
Right.
know what are the things that are happening that we can't maybe see with our eyes, but we feel with our hearts. Well, I think in Syria, one of the things that's happening is that people are standing up for themselves in a very like difficult way to understand, in a very hurtful way, and people are saying, we will not, you know, we will not lay down our hearts for you anymore, you dictator. You who tells us that we can only worship a certain way, or you who says that our media can only print certain things,
Right.
or you who says, that unless you act a certain way, you are a good or not good Syrian. So many of my family members have experienced the huge pain body of that regime.
Yes. Yeah.
I have an uncle who was kidnapped in the 80s and tortured, and then we never heard from him again. And then I have countless cousins and second cousins, and even aunts and uncles who, in the current state of things, have been similarly tortured and killed in some instances. And just to see that kind of stuff happening, you have to look at it from more than like, well, it's their religion that's forcing them to do that. Well, that's not real. Like, religion doesn't force anybody to do anything.
Right.
Like, one of the like foundational rules in Islamic theology is that there is no compulsion in religion. And to say that one thing is compulsory, yes, you can say that, but to force somebody to do it is another issue entirely, and that is entirely forbidden. And so to say that Islam forced that person to behave that way or to act in that way, that's not real,
Right. Right.
because we all independently act from our hearts or from our pain bodies and our egos, and
Yeah.
we all make those choices. And, you talk about ISIS. Well, I think ISIS is a huge topic, and I don't know how far you want to get into it, but, I think at the end of the day, it's just disenchanted and, kids who don't feel connected to anything
Mm.
find this expression of violence in the world and destruction, where they can act out their pain bodies,
Right.
and they can act out violence, and you know, I think we just have to look at it in those ways. Um, yeah, and so I think ISIS also, the fact that it's called ISIS is so strange to me because Isis is this goddess,
Right.
and she's amazing.
Yeah.
And with this feminine awakening that's happening right now, I think it's kind of weird. And like, I won't say that it's a conspiracy, but I think it is very strange that this group of men, who basically have zero actual understanding of Islam,
Yeah.
are being called ISIS.
Yes.
Like,
Right.
like way to undermine an entire, two entire religions,
Mm.
or ways, just
Yes.
with the naming of a group,
Yes.
you know.
I actually, not a little off topic, but a band I love was named ISIS. They broke up
Mm.
in I think 2000, I don't know, 10ish.
Mhm.
But they got when this first started happening, they had to change their Facebook name. I actually
Mm.
have a zip up hoodie of them that I have not felt comfortable wearing because it says ISIS on it. Am I really
Yeah.
gonna like? I actually wore it one morning to go bring my stepdaughter to school without even clicking, and then after that, it's like, oh, geez, like no one said anything, but I'm like,
Yeah.
man, bunch of ruiners on so many
I
levels, you
know,
know?
I know,
Um,
really. And it's not like they called themselves that.
no, right, right.
So it feels like this strange ploy to undermine these amazing traditions.
Yes,
It's
yeah.
just kind of weird.
So, I mean, we we could talk for hours, but and I know that that's a whole nother conversation.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we don't have hours for the show, but I do want to, and we could just have you back on again because I mean, I would love to go further in depth with you, but I'd feel very remiss if we didn't talk about. I mean, you're putting your money where your mouth is. You've said a couple of times already, let's have a conversation. That's where like we can start to dig deeper and start to root things out. Obviously, me
Yeah.
paraphrasing, but and so you've took it upon yourself a very brave act to start this Ask a Muslim movement, or I don't know what you would call it, but let's talk about that. First of all, I'm sure you've been asked a million times because you've been all over NPR and other great stations. Congratulations! I'm so glad that you're getting this attention. It's very needed. What first of all inspired you to do it, and then let's talk about that.
Yeah. So Sebastian and I were sitting around, Sebastian's my husband. We were
Yes.
sitting around one day, and we were like, San Bernardino shootings had just happened, and
Mm.
it was just like a facepalm moment. Like, oh God, like please don't let them be Muslim.
Yeah.
And why is this happening? Like, and then they were Muslim. And it was just like, people experience terror and they experience like trauma as a result of this, like the American people, the
Right.
world at large. We experience this trauma. And I think for Muslims, it like quadruples when the perpetrators are Muslim. Because then it's like, okay, well, what kind of dirty looks am I going to get now?
Right.
Or who's going to say some kind of xenophobic, racist nonsense to me today?
Yeah.
And how do I guard myself from that? How do I shield myself energetically? And, how do I protect myself,
Mm.
really? And I know so many Muslim girls who have, chosen to stop wearing hijab, to stop covering, because they're afraid. And I just think that that's so sad. And it's such a marker of the world we live in that, a woman on both sides of the spectrum, is told you cannot dress a certain way and be safe. Don't dress like that or you'll get raped. And
Right.
don't dress like that or you will, be hurt by some racist. I think they're the same story
Mm.
actually. And I think I'm just out here talking to people saying like I am not going to check off either of those boxes. I'm going to continue to do what I do and wear what I wear, but I'd love to talk to you about it.
Mm.
And maybe if we talked about it, maybe you would be less afraid. And maybe if we were both less afraid, the world would be a better place,
Right.
and a happier place. And so I think one of the things we're doing is saying that um, we recognize the fear on both sides. The fear on the side of the person who says that Muslims are terrorists, and that because Muslims are terrorists, I'm afraid of Muslims,
Mm.
and the fear on the other side that says, are you a random racist, xenophobic person who's going to hurt me because I look Muslim?
Mm.
And I think saying, well, there's fear on both sides, let's deal with it.
Yeah.
And how can we do that? Well, I mean, Mr. Obvious to us was let's just go out and talk to people. Well, how do you entice people to talk to you? Have some donuts,
Who
you
doesn't
know?
love donuts?
So we went to Dunkin' Donuts and, we're on the East Coast, we're in Massachusetts, and we set up in Cambridge. Um, and we set up the stand, and oh my God, it was amazing. The first time out, people were weeping
Wow.
and saying thank you for doing this and so much love and support. And this came at a time where I was even afraid,
Mm.
of doing it. I thought like, well, maybe somebody crazy will come up and have a gun, and
Sure.
hurt us. And we have a 2-year-old who's out there with us sometimes. And to say that like we willfully and knowingly subjected him to that. The first time that we went out there, it was just so like the love was obvious and it was overwhelming and the support was amazing. And it was just such a breath of fresh air.
Mm.
Suddenly I could stop taking my shallow breaths and breathe deep into the knowing that the world is generous and kind and that we were safe. And once I submitted to the idea, it was really beautiful,
Mm.
and remarkable. And I don't think what we did was remarkable, but I think the result was remarkable.
Yeah.
That people want to connect, and that what does it mean that people want to stop and talk to us? I think it means that people love, and however it's shown in the world or offered, people want it, and hey, this is just our way of giving some love and healing some of the hurt and saying, we're not going to be afraid anymore, and we hope that you will join us in that endeavor.
Mm.
Um, and we've done it a bunch of times already, and like you said, a bunch of news organizations came out, and really just we were blown away by the response that it had gotten because we didn't think it was remarkable.
Right.
We just were like, this is the least we can do. It's the only thing we can do, is just to say, hey, like we're here, and if you'd like, come have a conversation with us. We won't bite.
That's what I love is you're so sincerely humble about it, and that to me shows what a true like just inspiration from God it was to working through you to just go do this, open up this conversation. I can't even begin to express the amount of sincere respect I have towards you and Sebastian for stepping up and as Gandhi would say, being the change. Quite literally, like really stepping out there and knowing that there was the potential, that someone might harm you. I just so much respect to you guys for doing that.
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, really, I've been following it, and it's been really touching to me to see that. So I don't know, I'm tearing up a little. I feel it. It's a really it's a big thing. So
And I think that's the response that we've been shown a lot is that I was crying at one point, many points when different people would come up and say, thank you for doing this. You have my support and love, and I'm sorry that you have to do this, or that you feel like you have to do this. I don't know. It is. It's a. There's some kind of mourning in it that our world is such that this is maybe a necessity, or that it is, you know, just the fact that there's, like we all have so much love to give, and we don't all give it.
Yeah.
And I am of the belief. I truly believe that you never run out of love, that love is this unconditional, unending fountain, and that the more love we give, the more love we find. And to think that people even hoard their smiles or their love or their care, I think that brings over us a sense of mourning, and that when somebody goes out of their way to say I love you, or to say, um, here's a donut. I see you and see me too, and let's talk and connect. I I think people want that, and people just want love,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
And I tear up at it too. I tear up every time, and I feel touched every time somebody wants to stop by and say, "Hey," I think it's remarkable that people want to stop and talk to us.
Mm.
That's the remarkable piece to me, is
Yeah.
that anybody stops.
Yeah. It's so beautiful. So, I guess in closing, then, if there was one thing you'd like to leave the audience with, whether it's about your faith specifically, whatever the case may be, is maybe it's a question you haven't been asked yet that you'd like to answer. I don't know. What would you like to say and close?
Well, I would say reach out. Reach out to your neighbors, whether you have Muslim neighbors or Hindu neighbors or anything neighbors.
Mm.
Reach out and give love and be love in the world, because there's not enough of it, and we all have an infinite amount. And I think that if we all went a little bit, one of my dear friends, he said to me, Mona, just work a little bit harder. Just do a little bit more. And when you think you can't do a little bit more, just do a tiny bit more.
Mm.
And I think we can all do a tiny bit more to love more deeply and more truly from our hearts. And that we can all, we can't all try a lot harder, but we can all try a little bit harder to be more kind and friendly and smiley. And in Islam, a smile is considered charity, like not like ho hum, like charity in the metaphorical sense.
Right.
It's considered charity, as if you've given your money away, like Ram Dass did at the beginning of his journey when Maharaji said, "Give it all."
Yeah.
That's a smile. It's giving it all, but with your heart. And I would just say, get to know your neighbors, your coworkers, connect, look people in the eye, and be present with them. I think that's the only way out of our current state of affairs, and that's the only way out of our disconnectedness, is to really just be there for one another and see each other and give a little bit more love, and then give a little bit more.
and and just a tiny bit more after that.
Yeah.
That's very beautiful and profound. Well, Mona, thank you so much for the first part of our conversation. I would love to have you back on at a future date when we can connect again, because there's so much more to talk about. But I thank you for your time. I thank you for walking me through a bit of your beautiful faith, and for sharing yourself with the audience. And hopefully this is just one more step in the direction of love and healing and reconciliation and unity. So,
Well, thank you so much, Chris. It's really been a pleasure to talk to you and to know you. And I
yeah,
look forward to more.
thank you so much, Mona.
Thank you.